All right, final feelings for the Dogs and Gators. The cocktail party is upon us down in Jacksonville. This is going to be a tough ask for the Gators, and there's a couple of reasons why. But the number one thing that hits me right when I look at this is, for Florida, dealing with physicality has been a challenge. Um, there have been times when they've really run the ball well against McNeese, against Tennessee, and against Vanderbilt. The Tennessee game, particularly, I think, is where Florida did what they wanted to do, and it was somewhat unexpected. Now, against Vanderbilt, a lot of people have run the ball. Against Utah, South Carolina, and Kentucky specifically, Florida was absolutely mauled. Their offense could not do anything in those games. And I've talked about this a lot, and I think Florida deserves a lot of credit for winning the South Carolina game. They stole that one. And that's when you're going in the right direction when you're stealing games, to be honest with you. But even in that game, they had 71 yards rushing. Do you know how many teams have run for over 100 yards against Georgia? There's been two this season. Tennessee Martin and Auburn. Now, what happened in that Auburn game? In the Auburn game, Auburn couldn't throw. Like, they literally could not throw the ball. They did not have 100 yards throwing in that game. So their only offense was to run. It was somewhat like playing Georgia Tech. And, you're running with your quarterbacks. That's what you're doing. In all the other games, no one had more than 86 yards rushing against Georgia. Ball State, 77. South Carolina, 53. UAB had 86. Kentucky had 55. And then 18 for Vanderbilt. It's hard to compare any one game to another, but when you have 7 games and you see that Georgia's allowed more than 100 twice, and then you look at Florida and you say they've only run for more than 100, let's see, 4 times in their 7 games, and one of those was against Charlotte with 111 yards. I mean, these are not impressive statistics as it relates to things. When you watch Florida's play against Tennessee, they really did kind of what they wanted to do. I don't think that's a good sign for Tennessee playing Georgia in the future, by the way. I mean, I've watched Tennessee a couple times now, and they are capable of playing really good halves. They played a pretty decent second half against the Gators. They played a very good first half against Alabama. Man, they got mauled in that first half against Florida. It was a mistake for a touchdown right there. I mean, everything that Tennessee failed to do, everything that Florida did to Tennessee, Kentucky did the same exact thing to Florida. A really bad interception resulting in great field position, which was checked in for a touchdown. It was just, and they were on the road. Tennessee was on the road. So there was a lot of stuff. But when you boil it down to things here, 35 yards rushing for 111 yards against Charlotte. That's just not going to work. 21 rushes for 13 yards against Utah. Now, there were some sacks in there, obviously. That's terrible. Against Kentucky, 29 rushes for 69 yards. That's 2 yards a rush. It's like it's not good enough. Against South Carolina, not dissimilar. 33 carries for 71 yards. It's just way too many of those to happen. And as it relates to penalties, Florida is one of the most penalized teams in the SEC. It's just not good enough without Georgia really helping the Gators. I don't know any other way to put it. They've had 47 penalties in seven games for 335 yards. That's almost 7 a game. That's way too many penalties. And you look at, Georgia really struggled against Auburn and South Carolina. I don't know that they really struggled against South Carolina, but okay. Yeah, I mean, that happens sometimes. Rivalry game on the road, 2 turnovers resulting in 14 points for Auburn, and Georgia wins the game by 7. I mean, it wasn't nice. It didn't look good. It was probably, it was in the same universe as Ohio State, the way they looked a couple times this year, but certainly against Penn State. So I think for Florida, they're playing the number one offense. They're playing the best offense they've played this season. there's even more coming their way. They're playing the best defense they play. That includes Utah this season. They're playing a team in Georgia that everyone is the easy story to write about, being in the media and having done this for almost a quarter century. The easy story to talk about is how Brock Bowers is not playing for Georgia. And that is an obvious fact. But that is low-hanging fruit. That is something that is the shiny object that folks who really don't cover these teams, talk about. Like, for instance, Graham Mertz is really playing well right now. But if I covered Florida, I would know even better about his performance throughout the season. It may be that he's playing better, which is what Spurrier said earlier this week on Feinbaum's show. I think he is clearly playing better. The question is everybody else playing better with him? I don't know. I don't know. I think the Gators played 2 games where they played pretty well, which is the Tennessee game, and I would say the Vanderbilt game more than the South Carolina game. And here's why I argue that too. When you're giving up 39 points, you're not playing well. I mean, you're just not playing well. So offensively, and this is what people are talking about with Graham Mertz, offensively, Florida has had their best 2 games. Their only 2 games in Power 5 play where they've scored over 30 points. So that's another sort of challenge if you're Florida is, can you score the way that Georgia has scored over time? I don't think so against the Dawgs. Now we're just going to see what happens. But I think more than anything, this is all that statistical stuff. Just watch Florida play. You can be hot for periods of time in games. You look at Georgia against in their first game. It was not a pretty game against UT Martin. They won 48-7. They were in the second quarter. They exploded on them. Ball State, it was just around halftime. South Carolina, the whole second half. UAB, it was in the second quarter moving forward. And Auburn, it was the second half. Against Kentucky, it was right away. Against Vanderbilt, it was the second quarter. So, the other thing here too is, it's not that Florida's. I mean, you could see immediately with the Utah game that they were out physical. Can they physically match up with Georgia for 60 minutes? I have my doubts about that. I mean, I think that's going to be hard for them. Tennessee, that again, their best 2 wins for me. Their best wins were Tennessee and South Carolina. But they played better to me against Tennessee and Vanderbilt. Against South Carolina, so we're talking about peak Florida is a 13-point win at home over Tennessee or a 2-point win against South Carolina on the road. But and then it's kind of a pretty good beating of Vanderbilt at home. I think those were that was their best games. What happens if they don't play their best game? What happens if Florida plays like they did against Utah? What happens if they play like against Kentucky? What happens if they play like they did against Charlotte, to be honest with you? What do 2 of those 3 teams have in common? Of the 7 teams that Florida's played, 2 of them are more like Georgia than the others, and that's Utah and Kentucky. And those were lopsided losses. I mean, those were a 19-point loss to Kentucky and a 13-point loss to Utah. That might not have been as close as it was with Utah, to be honest with you. Now, but those games were on the road. Florida's undefeated at home. They played better at home than they have on the road, but then you look at the Charlotte game and you're like, so these guys just are not consistent, not in a way that you really need to be dealing with this Georgia team. And there's a lot right now, somewhat like going into the Kentucky game. There's a lot of questions surrounding Georgia. Are they the number 1 team in the country? Can they do this without Brock Bowers? Is Carson Beck going to play well or get freaked out by playing at home, in his home in Jacksonville? It's all those 3 questions alone are such a big deal. You still have Georgia folks who are sort of antsy about this game just because they're playing Florida. You got to watch Florida. I mean, Florida's just not. This is not 1990s Florida. This is not Urban Meyer's Florida. This is a team that's getting blown out by Kentucky. So, that what you have on their decals may say Florida Gators, but I don't think that's really anything. I mean, That's for other people to worry about. Like Kirby Smart's not playing defensive back in this game. He's not. And Tim Tebow's not out there, and Brandon Spikes and Javon Curse and all these guys that were such good players for the Gators for years. They're not out there. They're such good players that play for Georgia. And that's the difference right now is the sort of holy terror run that Florida has had through the years. They're going to have to start that up again. Can they start that up on Saturday? It doesn't seem like it to me. It doesn't seem like it to me. Now, you could get into a situation where, Florida gets a couple of turnovers against the Dogs, and that could really make this game tight. Florida and Georgia have about the same turnover margin, okay? What happens if Georgia gets 2 turnovers and the Gators don't? Then you're talking about a really nasty game in my mind. There's a lot of stuff that has been ironed out here over time. Now you lose Brock Bowers, and that will complicate things. There's no question about that. But you recruit for a reason, and these guys are so deep in many spots, and they're not super deep at tight end, but they're deep enough right now to replace arguably top 5 player in college football with an extremely a potential All SEC candidate certainly an All SEC candidate next year at tight end. So they're just by far the better. There's clearly the better coaching staff. Now, like, that's not close. When you talk about head coach to coordinator or co-coordinator that they've got going on at Florida, they got a brand new wet behind the ears defensive coordinator who just gave up 39 to a South Carolina offense that can be slowed. I'll put it to you that way. They gave up 39 points and should have lost that game. You've got, I don't know what's going on Florida's offense in terms of coordinator and so forth. It's not great. I know some of the coaching staff at Florida, because they've been at Georgia, they're just not to the level of these guys. They really didn't belong at Georgia then. So, but I think when you look at the totality of both programs, there's just no question who should win this game. I am skeptical that Florida would win this game, to be honest with you. And so just taking a step back, if the Gators cannot run effectively, they're going to get mauled. They're going to really get just destroyed in this game. Graham Mertz is hot for sure. But are you, are you Joe Burrow? Are you Tua? Are you Jalen Hurts? Are you Mac Jones? Are you Chad Kelly? Are you Dawgs from Tennessee? These are the level of player. Are you Bryce Young? These are the level of player that have beaten Georgia at quarterback. So you're talking about first-round draft picks, starters in the NFL, multiple Heisman Trophy winners, just really good. Jared Stidham, who was a backup. Could he be Jared Stidham? Could he be Chad Kelly? He might. He is not those other guys. Does he have the Auburn 2017 team to play with him? Does he have the explosive offense of the Rebels in 16? No, he does not. He does have really explosive playmakers. You look at Ricky Pearsall, that guy can roll. And then, oh my gosh, Travis Etienne's brother is legit. He can take it to the house and any carry. But he can also get knocked behind the line of scrimmage. If it's not there, it's not there. Are you setting the edge if you're Chaz and these other outside linebackers, right? That's going to be important. They really attacked Tennessee like that, the Gators, because it wasn't unbelievable. They didn't really seem to try through the middle of the defense. So can you do that? And will Georgia's linebackers A, set the edge, who if you're an outside guy, and then B, are Pop and Smile going to start playing more noticeably, I guess you could say, like they did last year? For us watching it, it doesn't seem like Smile and Pop have had the years that they had a season ago. There could be a reason for that. I don't know. But is that going to happen? If that happens, it's going to be really hard for Florida to run. And then, are you going to just go with Graham Mertz the whole game? Just going to throw it like Mississippi State last year? Or are you going to, who else? There's these teams that that's what they're going to do. That over a game doesn't work against Georgia. You have to be balanced because they'll just stop stuff. I mean, they will just take particular things away. And the overall speed of this Georgia team is still pretty ridiculous. They match up well with most anyone throwing it. I mean, I think if Caleb Williams were at Ohio State, Georgia would be in real trouble. But that's not what they're dealing with, and that's not who they're playing and all this stuff. I mean, that's not what it is. So I think, all this said, I expect Georgia to play well Saturday. And I think the reason why is, they tend to play well in big moments. And although they have, I would say, 4 big moments in a row here, this game is a big moment. It's been a big moment for a long time. Well before Kirby got there, well before Mark Richt was there. This game has been a big moment for a long time. And this team, I think, understands moments. This program understands moments. They understand them. They don't always produce great exhibitions when the moments aren't real big. But when the moment is big, they tend to come and really play. If it's a noon game against Kent State or Vanderbilt, they're not great at those moments compared to what they could be. But these they seem to do pretty well at. And, this will be the last Florida-Georgia or Georgia-Florida in on CBS. It's been a great partner through the years. They have really grown this particular event, but it will be even bigger over at ABC over time with Disney. And these guys seem to me like they know when the lights are shining brightest. They have performed in really big moments all the time, with the exception maybe of the SEC championship game in 21. They seem to be ready for the moment. And, if Carson plays adequately, if Georgia sets the edge, it's just going to be hard for Florida to win this game. And Florida's going to have to protect. They're not protecting real well right now. 10 sacks in the last 3 games. It's just not going to get it done. I've got the Dawgs in this one. I've got them covering. And we're just going to see what happens in Jacksonville on Saturday.